Welcome, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Women for Girls. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Emily Kolinski Morris, Global Chief Economist with the Ford Motor Company. Tonight's program will follow a fireside chat format, after which we'll have a Q&A session. If you'd like to submit a question for Emily to respond to, please do so using the Zoom Q&A feature, which should be found in the bottom panel of your screen. And without further ado, I'd like to now hand it over to Betsy Keller, Executive Director of the Invest in Girls program, for her opening remarks. Betsy?
Thank you so much, Thomas. And thank you all for joining us this evening for our Women for Girls speaker series. As Thomas said, my name is Betsy Kelder. I'm the Executive Director of Invest in Girls, a program of the Council for Economic Education. Invest in Girls is working to usher in the first generation of financially literate girls and increase the number of women working in careers in finance and financial services. To grow interest in the field, you need to be shown the opportunities that exist for you and what the path to success is. Women are dramatically underrepresented in finance and lack confidence in matters of managing their own money. We are working for transformational change in these areas. Many of you are part of the workshops we teach to make sure girls have the foundational concepts of financial literacy. You may also have participated in the Future Females in Finance program, a career access workshop focused on learning the language of the industry and trying on different roles. Maybe you've also been part of our mentoring program during this or a previous school year. If you haven't been part of any or all of these, we encourage you to visit our website, investgirls.org/students, and sign up. We'll be starting programs over the summer and again in the fall. Research tells us that when we see role models who look like us, we are better able to envision ourselves in those roles. This, coupled with the founding principle of IIG, to be an organization of women for girls, led us to create the Women for Girls Speaker Series, an opportunity to bring executive level women from major corporations to you, our girls, and our network to talk about their careers, lives, and learnings. Our speaker today is the Global Chief Economist for Ford Motor Company. At CEE, we are also lucky enough to call her one of our board members. She's been a valued and trusted advisor to the organization for a number of years. With a Ph.D. in economics and a passion for her work, I'm going to let her tell you more of her story and more about her work at Ford. Please help me welcome Emily Kolinski Morris. Hi, Emily, how are you?
Good. Hi, Betsy. How are you doing?
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we're so excited to hear more about you. I'd love to just start by having the girls get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit, give us a private glimpse into your life. I know you are in the Detroit area working in Motor City, but tell us a little bit more.
Sure. I'm actually a Michigan native, Betsy, so I was born and raised in Michigan. And I have to say, as I was growing up, of course, living in the Metro Detroit area, just about everyone I knew had a father, uncle, mother, sister, brother, cousin. Many of them had multiple members of their families that worked for one of the auto companies. So it really wasn't where I thought I would end up. I wanted to do something more interesting and different from what everyone around me seemed to be doing. But when I went to school, studied economics, had a fairly linear path, actually, because I studied economics, became an economist. I know a lot of folks don't have the benefit of that sort of linear path these days. But what I really wanted to do with all that was I really wanted to do something internationally. I really wanted to have a global focus in my work. And something I had never realized growing up, probably because most of those father, uncle, brother, cousins, mother, sisters were either doing administrative jobs or were doing engineering. I didn't realize the global reach of Ford Motor Company. And so when I joined the company, I was initially the economist covering Asia Pacific markets. And that was around the time of the Asian financial crisis, which kind of pales in comparison to some of the financial crises we've experienced since then. But I've been at Ford over 20 years now because it's really fed my passion to be part of a global community. And I talk to people around the world on a daily basis, and that just absolutely motivates me. So
That's so interesting. Tell us more about, what an entry-level economist does, and then sort of how you progress through those ranks. My guess is most of our girls don't know much about what you do once you have a PhD in economics.
Absolutely. And in fact, when I joined Ford, I didn't have my PhD yet. I had my master's. I was actually what is called ABD in academic circles. That means all but dissertation. So that kind of means you flamed out, to be honest. I went through, I completed all my coursework, completed all my exams for the PhD program. And then it came time to write my dissertation, and I was working with an advisor, and he didn't get tenure and he left the university. And I was sort of at the point of either starting all over or just sort of throwing in the towel and moving on. And I was getting a little frustrated with academia. And I thought, I'm just going to go out and kind of join the work world. So I actually worked in Lansing, Michigan, in the state capital for about 4 years after leaving graduate school. And then through one of my former professors, learned of the opportunity at Ford. So I joined Ford, as you said, as sort of a junior economist. And after several years with Ford, my supervisor, who was the chief economist at the time, she suggested to me that I should go back and try to finish that dissertation. And I resisted initially. I said, first of all, they're not going to let me do that. I don't even know how I would do that at this point. At this point in time, I had just had my last batch of children. And I say batch because my 2 youngest are boy-girl twins. So I had 4 children at this point under the age of 5. And here she was suggesting to me that I should go back and write a dissertation in economics in addition to working full time. So needless to say, that required a lot of reflection. But I did, make the request, and they did let me go back. And I'm really glad that I did, because it was actually one of the things, that I had left unfinished on my path, and that was not a comfortable position for me. So I was happy to have the opportunity to go back and sort of course correct. And that allowed me to progress further and to be able to assume the role of chief economist when she retired in 2014.
Wow, excellent.
That's quite a story. I'm sorry, that was a lot.
No, it's great. I love that story because, what's interesting is you said it was a linear path, which I think it certainly was, but not without its potholes, right? So maybe a straight street with some things to swerve around. And I'm curious, what do you think about when you hit those points that are really kind of key decision makers for you? When your professor leaves the university and you have to decide, do I start again, or do I just leave this? Like, what's in your, I know economics is all about decisions. So how do you make decisions like that?
That was a really tough one for me, because I wasn't accustomed to sort of leaving things unfinished, but I had to think about it in a different way and not think about sort of what I was not doing, what I was leaving, but think about what I was going to and what I was going to be doing. And, for me at that time, it I think was the right choice, even though I did end up going back later to finish. At the time, it would have, really continued to be a struggle, and I suppose I could have done it, but I was really very unhappy. And in the 8 or so years from when I left to when I came back to finish my dissertation, actually the process got a lot easier, because it's going to shock these girls on the call. But when I was first in grad school, we didn't really have the computer resources, the internet resources, that we did 10 years later. So I was originally, pulling journals out of the library, photocopying things. I had stacks of articles, on my desk as I was writing my paper. Well, fast forward, a couple of years, and all of a sudden I'm doing all this online, and you can just download articles. And so honestly, I guess in the long run, it worked out for the best, because the process was sure a lot easier with access to the internet.
Yeah.
And now I really feel old. So got to talk about something that happened to be one of those pivotal points, where the world was quickly changing. That was a time where things just became different really quickly.
Really quickly. I mean, because similarly, things were just coming online. I realized that my wedding picture is behind me, and I realized I was married before many of the girls on this call were born. So, that's okay. what I found really interesting within that, though, and I think would resonate with our girls as well, is, they're at a point where they're making some really big decisions, and they're deciding, are they going to college? If they are, where are they going? How much debt are they going to take on? And I wonder for you, did you ever doubt the decision that you made? And how do you think about those kinds of decisions on reflection? I know for me, I always thought, gosh, where I go to college, like that's gonna just define everything, right? It's gonna define what I do and all of these pieces. And I think there are a lot of opportunities to change course, but I'm sort of curious, whether when you left, you thought you'd ever go back to it, or whether you just knew you wouldn't.
Yeah, I think at the time I didn't think I would. I was done, but you don't realize how things can change, and it wasn't just the internet, right? The whole discipline, sort of changed a little bit over time. Economics, unfortunately, still today, has not always been the most friendly field for females and minorities. And so when I left undergrad, I actually had a wonderful young professor who was my statistics teacher. And so, I thought that was just amazing, right? Because here she was, this young woman, she was right out of grad school, so much passion, so much enthusiasm, made everything understandable, right? Tried to make it easy for people to learn. And then when I showed up at graduate school, and the whole thing seemed to be set up around making it hard, like they weren't there to help you. They were there to kind of make you struggle. At least that was how it felt to me. And so leaving that sort of felt healthy. It felt like the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And when I went back, things had begun to change. They had, first of all, had to grapple with the fact that they were losing so many, not just women and minorities, but people in general just weren't finishing programs. So I think part of it was that they realized that, why are so many people not able to see this through? Maybe there are some things that we're doing right, that we could do differently. And I think I also went back with benefit of having been in a professional environment for 10 or so years, and understanding sort of how to work with people, how to get things done, and sort of professionalized the process a little bit, instead of just being a student kind of locked in your hovel and trying to figure out what to do every day to try to make progress on this giant paper.
Right. So I bet that there are a lot of people on this call who know Ford. Maybe they even drive a Ford, and know that they make cars, but might be wondering, why would a car company have a global chief economist? Why would they have a department of economists? So help us understand what the role plays within the organization, and sort of how you fit into the key workings.
Absolutely. And that's something I certainly didn't know when I was looking around and saying, oh, that's the one place I wouldn't want to work, right? So Ford, because the auto industry has two characteristics, economists are useful in two ways. One is that autos are a very cyclical industry, which means that auto sales tend to vary with variations in the economy. Some things may be more sort of immune to economic cycles. I think nothing is fully immune, to a big recession, but autos tend to be very cyclical. And so having economists who are trained, we're the monitors of the business cycle. And so we're watching for leading indicators, trying to help gauge, what's around the corner in terms of demand for new vehicles. The other thing about autos that is special is that we have a very long investment lead time. So, to think about future capacity, to think about new products, new plants, that's a 5 to 10 year proposition in some cases. And so economists are also good about identifying long-term trends. People, and this is sort of into behavioral economics, which is a passion, side passion of mine. People tend to sort of weight what is immediately in front of them much more heavily than they weight things in the future. And it leads people to sort of think the way things are today is the way things will always be. And economics tries to look at sort of, the dynamics to try to drive things toward more of an equilibrium, which means that just because what we're experiencing today it's real, it's where we are, but it may represent some imbalances that need to be corrected over time. And so we're always helping to try to identify how those longer term trends may play out as we think about investments. And of course, the other piece, which I touched on at the beginning, is just the fact that Ford is so global. So my team are responsible for monitoring at different levels of depth over 100 countries around the world where Ford sells vehicles. So we're kind of the eyes and ears on the outside world, if you will.
Yeah, I want to go back to something that you said. So you talked about how you look for leading indicators. And I would love for you to help our girls understand what leading indicators are. And then specifically, what are the leading indicators for a motor company?
Yeah, of course. So leading indicators are, as the name suggests, I think one of the things I like about economics is things, are, hopefully kind of self-explanatory. So they're data points, measures of activity that are suggestive of the way things might happen in the future. So a lot of those may be survey-based, for example. So things like consumer confidence surveys, surveys of manufacturers and of service providers that say sort of, what are you seeing? How are you feeling right now? Do you feel optimistic about the future, pessimistic about the future? Those can be good leading indicators of then tomorrow, will those consumers be spending? Will those businesses be producing more or less? So that's certainly something that economists typically use. And then for auto specifically, the interesting thing is we are sort of a leading indicator. We tend to be one of the first places that improvements or deteriorations in the economy shows up. So we're sort of trying to find leading indicators to forecast a leading indicator. And again, that's one reason why economists are useful for Ford, because you can't sort of wait and see what everybody else is doing, because we tend to be one of the ones that sees it first.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. And you need to be making decisions, as you said, so far in advance that you've really got to, you have to try and predict not just what it is, but what it's going to be. That's really interesting. I want to go back when you were talking about your, sort of how you got to economics and having this statistics professor, this woman who was kind of a role model for you, I'll say. Tell us a little bit about mentors you've had and how you found them and how you've utilized them. I think that this is something that's so important in the lives of everyone, men and women.
Absolutely, it is really important, and it's challenging because by nature, I'm not an outgoing person. I know my kids never believe it when I say that, because they see me doing calls like these and they see me making presentations, and I tell them, yeah, but after I'm done, I actually have to go lock myself in a dark room, and kind of recover from all that engagement with the outside world. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I don't tend to be sort of a handshaker, a hi, I'm so-and-so, and, help me, be my mentor. I've never honestly in my life done that. I think one thing that is important to understand though, and that I understand more and more as I get further in my career, is that the grown-ups around you, if you will, they notice you more than you realize. I have 2 high schoolers and 2 middle schoolers of my own right now, and I try to explain that to them as well. You think your teachers are looking out over a class of 30 students and not noticing you, but they are. And the question is, how do you want them to notice you? So just little things like the way that you pay attention, the way that whether you're prepared or not prepared, those things are noticed, and, they're certainly going to be inclined to respond positively when someone like that reaches out. That said, if you're struggling, I've also seen that. I mean, just the very act of asking for help, will tell those teachers and those mentors that you care enough to ask for help, whether your results up till now have been good or not. That's incredibly powerful. So even if it's not in your nature, if you need help, I think it's always important to ask for it, and, try to be cognizant of what's a reasonable thing to ask for, right? Not like fix all my problems, but, try to start with something specific that you think, the person could actually do. And, sometimes, the mentors just come from places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. It may be that it's the teacher in the field, in the class that of the subject that you want to pursue. But if you find that you have a good relationship with a teacher in a different area, you should always pursue that, even if it's not the field that you think you want to study, because there's always something that you can learn from those people. And when it comes to things like recommendations or knowing people, they may know somebody in the field that you do want to pursue. So I think it's always important to find relationships as organically as you can. That's sort of how it's been for me, at least, how it's worked for me. You sort of want to gravitate to the people that give you the right vibe, that make you feel welcome. And it may not be like, you picture this person in your mind who should be your perfect mentor. But I think it's also important just to recognize the people who are open to it and who may be there for you. And that's always a good place to start.
Yeah, it seems to me that often that that mentor you've created in your mind is really a combination of a bunch of different mentors who sort of each serve different areas. I love your comment about letting yourself gravitate towards people, because I think so often we think about what we think we're supposed to do, right? And we sort of start following that, and you feel yourself kind of pulled to the side, but you're kind of trying to make yourself go forward, and leaning into those pulls is so important. And I think people don't realize that mentors are not just about at work or at school, right? But they're sort of about guiding you through your life, and are just so impactful. Sort of along similar lines, in addition to having a mentor who sort of can help guide and answer questions, what do you think it takes to succeed these days? What are the skills or qualities that you think are important to employers, or to being successful in business, or will be necessary over the next few years?
I think that something that certainly I look for, and that I know has become more obvious to others, is the need for sort of healthy skepticism. I think it's really difficult when people are starting out to recognize that the folks in front of you don't necessarily have all the answers. They will tell you how it's done, and it's the way that they've done it. But the world is changing really quickly, and it's always worth asking the question of sort of why are things done this way? Not in a aggressive way or in a challenging way necessarily, but just in a truly curious way. And I find that people are generally very happy to answer those questions. And sometimes you may highlight something that they hadn't realized or hadn't thought about. But when I think about the candidates that we interview, or the young analysts at the company, who I am always impressed with, it's the ones who are able to be engaged enough, first of all, to know what a good question might be, and who are good at asking those questions, in a productive way. We went through a long time, both in school and in the professional world, I think, where it was like somebody tells you to jump and you say how high, and that's the end of the story. And unfortunately, that whole system has really wrung a lot of the good critical thinking skills out of all of us. My team, I've always encouraged them, to ask a lot of why questions. And I think that's, to me, that is the key thing to be successful in the world today.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. I was going to ask a similar follow-up question, which is sort of what you think has changed in the workplace, whether, that desire for young and more junior staff to ask questions is new. And maybe you can put it in some specific terms for us and help us understand by telling us, what do you think is different in your department now that you're running it, as opposed to when you joined it?
Well, we're smaller, unfortunately. That's one thing that's different. But I think, that's actually one of the things that forces you to think about things differently, and to prioritize things differently. If you have a more limited set of resources, you have to figure out how to do the best you can with what you have. And so that's sort of one way of being sort of a forcing function to say, well, if some of the things we're doing weren't really that useful, or weren't providing that much value added, then we're going to have to figure out what were the most important things, because that's all we have time to do anymore. Whether the resource be time or money or staff, it sort of forces you to prioritize. So that has certainly sort of evolved over time, since I joined Ford, and since I joined the economics team at Ford. And I think generally speaking, as we move to a world where more jobs can be automated, it just elevates the importance of that critical thinking, right? Because that's the piece that can't be replaced by an algorithm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I have a bunch of questions that have come in from the audience, so I'm gonna turn to those, though I could talk to you for hours just about what I'm curious about. I love this first one. What is it like being a female leader in a male-driven field or discipline today? And have you seen positive change?
That's a great question. I have seen positive change. I will say, I mentioned at the beginning, economics as a field is sort of, not, has not had a high representation of women, although we certainly have some prominent exceptions to that. Our current Treasury Chair, Janet Yellen, being one of them. But she's, in some ways, she's the exception that proves the rule. She really has illustrated to me how to be a successful female in economics. She is known for being very thoughtful and very compassionate in terms of how she thinks about economic problems and bringing that perspective of not just what this means in a market sense, but what does it mean for people? And that's made her extremely effective. So I think it's really important as a female leader to, certainly there are some assimilations that you have to make. And I think everybody has to sort of decide for themselves and kind of read the room in terms of how much of that you need to do, depending on what field you may be in, what group of people you may be with. You may not want to lead with, my baby had a really poopy diaper this morning, and in some rooms that'd be a great line to start with. In some rooms, you do not want to, don't want to be that human. So you have to sort of always be sensitive to that. But I do think it's important to find your balance in terms of how authentic you want to be in the workplace. And I don't think there's any one answer to that. I think it's important to be authentic enough that you are adding value, right? Because otherwise then you're just like every other person and you're not, bringing any unique perspective. But, it may be different when, in different jobs that you have, in different companies, among different circles that you interact with. That may be a really old school view. I think some of the young people on this call, maybe they can go out and just like all out, just be themselves. And that may be what the world needs, to really change more quickly and more effectively than what we've seen so far. So again, maybe I'm dating myself and maybe that's kind of a generational thing, but that was my formula. I did try to be a little bit of a chameleon. And I understood that and I was okay with it. Not to say that that's the only way to be successful, but there'll be trade-offs.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting caveat. And certainly there are a lot of generational differences. What do you think you do as a female leader to try and make it a little bit more comfortable for everyone to be their authentic self, either with you or more generally?
Yeah, it is really important, Betsy, and that's something I reflected on when I became the chief economist. My predecessor was also a female, and she was the first female to hold that role. And she was absolutely amazing. She was an amazing economist. She developed her team, gave people wonderful opportunities, and she really encouraged people to be themselves. And yet when I reflected back on it, I realized she sort of knew a lot more about me than I did about her, at least until much later, like after she was done and we kind of became, friends after she left the company. I sort of became to know her on a more personal level, but it was sort of one way. And I realized that as much as somebody can say, be yourself, and it's okay if you have, family things going on, and how are your kids? If you as the leader don't also share a little bit of that, people are going to get the message that it's, that it's somehow not okay, or it's okay for the people at the lower level to do, but, not at the higher level. And I've been really pleased actually to see as a whole, I think companies and certainly Ford evolving more toward, encouraging people to truly bring more of that into the workplace. But it is really important to, always share selectively. You should never share more of yourself than you're comfortable sharing at work. I tend to be a relatively private person anyway, but you really do have to do that a little bit as a leader. so that people realize that it truly is okay for them to do it as well.
Yeah, and so they understand that you're a human as well. And I do think that maybe, it's cliched at this point to say it, but that a lot of that humanization of people has been helped by this sort of virtual environment we've been in. My colleagues definitely know my daughters better than they ever would have before because, they're just here more often. So I do find that part of it nice. And I think, mirrors really well what we're trying to do and invest in girls and why the Women for Girls Network is so important. It was really a group of women who said, I don't want the next generation to have to go through what I went through, to have to, sort of hide parts of their lives or not feel as though they could fully be their authentic selves. And, I really appreciate your modeling that by recognizing, you needed to give a little bit more of yourself. While remaining true to that piece, which is that you are private, you're more of a private person. I think that's so important. Another one from the audience: what subjects should I study and focus on in high school if I want to pursue a career like yours?
Oh, okay, that's great. Well, I didn't take economics in high school, so you certainly doesn't have to be that. Although, thanks to CEE's work, it is now part of the high school curriculum in many states. So depending where you are, you may have to take economics before you graduate high school. I think, what I liked about economics was that it was, it's by definition, it's a social science. So there's sort of a technical aspect to it, but there's also a human aspect to it. And so depending what sorts of things you're interested in, it could be anything from psychology to mathematics to social studies, right? All those things sort of play in one role or another to economics because it's about the institutions and how they function, but it's about the behavior of the people within those institutions. And certainly, especially the way it's taught today, unfortunately, there's quite a bit of math involved. So those are kind of the areas. And there's also a difference between math and statistics, by the way. I think statistics is a great field. And if you have the opportunity to take that in high school with hopefully a teacher as good as the one that I had in college, someone who can really show you how powerful it is and how interesting and exciting it is. I think that's actually something everybody should know a little bit about to be a good citizen, because statistics can be so often misused. It's really important to be able to view it with a good critical eye. So.
Yeah, I wish I had gone to where you went to college for statistics, because my statistics teachers not as strong in really getting you excited about it. But it is true. I mean, it's so fascinating to look at how they're used. So you mentioned you didn't take economics in high school. This question that was submitted ahead of time sort of speaks to that a little. If you didn't take it in high school, at what point did you know you were interested in and good at economic analysis and forecasting? And why is it a calling for you?
Yeah, so I guess one more little piece of family history that I should share is that my dad was actually an economist. He was an economics professor. And again, sort of like my story with all the auto company people, it didn't necessarily mean that was why I studied economics. It was sort of like I studied economics in spite of the fact that was what my dad did, because it wasn't my goal to necessarily follow in his footsteps. And that was never something he would have pushed me to do. When I went to college, I was sort of thinking around something like law school. I was really interested in, political institutions and sort of the way the world works, but I hadn't been exposed to economics, as a class, because I hadn't taken it in high school. And so when I did start to explore that area, I found that it combined areas of a lot of different things that I was interested in. And, one of the things about me is that I really have a lot of different interests. I enjoy music and art and theater and English. I mean, if I had like my dream job, I probably would have been a book editor, but I didn't want to be, the starving artist, or starving copy editor, I guess, to try to find my way into the publishing world. And I find psychology and behavioral things fascinating. So what I love about economics and where I found my passion for it was that it can really be applied to almost any situation. I have a good friend who says, there's economics in everything. And that is pretty close to true, because economics is about how people make decisions and how they, allocate the scarce resource that may be no more complicated than the resource of their time, but we're always, making those trade-offs. And I thought, well, wow, my mother had always advised me to, keep as many options open as you can, right? Leave all the doors open for as long as you can before you, start closing them. And I kind of felt as an undergraduate major, that was what economics did. And then by the end of my undergraduate career, I liked it so much, I thought I want to do more of this, and ended up going right on to graduate school from my undergrad.
That's great. You've alluded to this next question a bit, but maybe more directly, tell us, who are some of your inspirations in the field, or economists whose work and research you really admire?
Sure, absolutely. Well, of course, the top of the list always has to be Janet Yellen, not just as a female economist, but as an economist. Now, remember, again, dating myself, but when I was in graduate school, she wasn't the chair of anything. She was just a well-published professor at the University of Berkeley. And I was like, wow, this woman's name keeps popping up. She must be something special, because you don't see that many female names on all these articles that I'm pulling from bookshelves and photocopying in the library. So, she's sort of been with me all along, if you will. So watching her progression has been sort of inspirational to me throughout my career. And then, there are a lot of female economists that I look up to. There was an award that I received in college that was named after an economist called Joan Robinson. She was a little bit more of a left-leaning, sort of, some people consider her Marxist. Some of her writing sort of emanated from that sphere, but she was very skeptical. She had a lot of sort of sarcastic comments, like one of the reasons that it's important to study economics is not so that you have answers to the big economic questions, but so you can avoid being deceived by economists. So, I like that, healthy skepticism that she has, and that sort of, she was considered a leader in the field at her time, and was very well published, but, a little bit, a little bit of that healthy skepticism, I think, is good about any field that you might study. And, certainly my predecessor at Ford Motor Company was an incredible inspiration to me in terms of what she was able to accomplish, as a female in that role and as an economist. And she helped me to really expand my network, outside of the company as well, and always reminded me that, your world is not Ford Motor Company. You always want to make sure that you're feeding your network and your understanding of what's going on in the world outside of Ford, and that'll actually make you a better economist, and you can serve the company better by kind of having a little bit broader lens. And so I think that's been a really important thing for me too.
Yeah. So tied into that, I'm curious if you've met any of those economists that you talked about, and specific to a question that we got ahead of time is, how do you approach networking with high-powered individuals? So hopefully you've met some of them.
Right.
I'm thinking maybe Janet Yellen.
Yeah.
And what was that like, and how did you approach that? And what advice do you have in general around networking with high-powered individuals?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I talked about it a little bit, whether the person's high-powered or not, but especially when they're sort of a renowned type of individual. If you just really are kind of a fangirl and you just want to go up and you want to make sure you get to shake Janet Yellen's hand and get your picture taken with her, by all means, if you have the chance to do that, you should do it.
Guilty.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the VA.
Yeah, you just have to know that that's going to be the extent of that. I think you're not going to develop, a deep, relationship with anybody of prominence just because you got to go up and shake their hand and take your picture with them. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with doing that. And I have done that, myself as well.
We did talk a little about invest in girls, so I have that going for me too.
Yes, of course. No, it's always important to make your case and make your pitch, but you can't expect too much to come out of those things, because you have to think about how many people are approaching these folks in that same way every single day. So it goes back to what I said about the organic nature of the relationships. And a meeting with someone like that happens because you have a reason to meet with them is going to be so much more meaningful than just kind of forcing your way up to get a chance to take your picture with them. I was very fortunate in my role with Ford Motor Company, we do go and visit the Federal Reserve with some regularity every year or two. Our senior team will go down, and I'll visit, I'll attend with them, and we'll go and they can share their perspective with the Fed board about what they see in the industry, what trends we're seeing and how we're dealing with the world. And so that was actually how I was first introduced to Chair Yellen when she was at the Fed, and it was awe-inspiring. Believe me, I was and I didn't do a lot of talking in that meeting, but I felt very fortunate to be there just as a fly on the wall. And whether she actually remembered me or not, she was always very gracious to pretend that she did when I would see her in other places after speeches and things like that. So
yeah. Excellent. I love this next question that we got. What advice would you give women and people of color to help empower them to live productive, successful, and happy lives?
That's a wonderful question. I think at risk of sounding like the two-handed economist, right? On the one hand, on the other. But I do think you need to find your own balance in those questions. We talked a little bit earlier about how much of your authentic self to bring to work, for example. And that's something that you will have to decide as you go through your life. And there may be times when you feel you can be more authentic, and times when you feel that you sort of need to follow some script to sort of get your foot in the door, or get through that first job. So it's going to be a little bit different for everyone, I think. But I think we all have to have, the lines that we won't cross, right? The parts of ourselves either that we know we're not going to share with the world, or the parts of ourselves that we we need to share with the world in order to be comfortable, right? And if you're in a circumstance where you feel that that's really not possible, then I think as soon as possible, you need to figure out a way to change that circumstance, whether it means finding a different job, right? Different circle of friends or colleagues, because I think increasingly, I'm aware that it's really critical that we be able to, be true to who we are, whether that means, yes, I have 4 children, and, there will be times when my son, who is high functioning autistic child, he was in elementary school, and I would get phone calls in the middle of the day at work, and I would have to go in and tell my boss that, I'm sorry, but I've got to leave, for an hour, and I would have to go and talk him, down off the wall at school. Mm-hmm. So, you can choose whether or not you explain to people why it is that you have those things going on. But, at some point, reality, everyone has a reality, and it is going to collide with your work life at some point. So it's certainly a challenge. I don't have a perfect answer for you. So I apologize, because it's a very good question, and I'm afraid that's not a very good answer, but just a little bit from my experience.
It's a great answer, because I think it really speaks to something that I think a lot of us have been reckoning with recently, which is that we're all humans, and that in a lot of ways we've spent time sort of protecting the human part of us. And I think that, between working from home and seeing people's dogs and kids and lives and all those things over the last year, and, all the different really remarkable things that have happened in the world in the last decade, I think it's really caused us to sort of notice that we need to be honest and authentic about who we are. I will ask just one last question, because we are just about at 5:45, but I'd love to just let you have sort of a parting moment with the girls that are in this program, and sort of what you think is important for them to be thinking about as they head off into this chapter post high school, where they're really, starting to make decisions of consequence, and be much more in charge of the direction that their lives go in.
Yeah. Wow. That's a tall order, Betsy, because I know a lot of these girls probably, have a lot deeper and more varied life experience than what I've had. But I think the best advice I can give is to recognize that very few decisions are irreversible. I think the irreversible ones are the ones you want to examine the most closely. But in most cases, things can come around, things can change. And so, try to make the best decision you can for the next step ahead of you. And you don't always have to be thinking, 5 steps ahead, because by the time you get there, the world may have changed around you anyway. So as my mother said, leave as many doors open as you can. I think that's the best advice I can give.
That's great advice. That's really great advice. Thanks so much. What an excellent note to leave us on. I am sorry to the folks whose questions we didn't get to, but I appreciate your submitting them. And I'll remind everyone that we will have our last Women for Girls speaker of the school year on May 19th, excuse me. We'll be hearing from TT Cole at Citi. We're really looking forward to that. You can sign up for it on our website the same way that you did for this. But mostly, I just want to thank you, Emily, so much for your time today, for all of the time and thought and leadership that you give to your role as a board member of the Council for Economic Education, and to just how thoughtful you are. This has been a really lovely conversation, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for coming.
And if there are questions, I don't know if you have email addresses for the group that's on the call, but if you'd like me to try to answer the questions that we missed and send them out to the group, I'd be happy to do that.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. Have a nice night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.